Mulberry.
Good morning, Mulberry.
We miss you guys and we love y'all. Can't wait to see everybody live and in person. We hope y'all are all safe and healthy, and we'll keep praying for everybody, and can't wait to see you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Good morning, Mulberry. I miss everyone. I just wanted to tell everyone hi. I want to say a special hi to all my nursery and toddlers and preschool and my CDO. And hi, Russell. Hi, Zay. Hi, Zay. I want to say everybody. I can't name everybody because it would take too long, but I just want to say I'm going to try to call some of you, so be waiting for a telephone call. So I just want to say God bless, take care, and I miss you so very much. I hope to see y'all really, really soon. Love you.
Morning, everyone. We sure miss being at church on Sundays with y'all.
Yeah, we can't wait to get back to church and see you guys in person again. We've just been home. Justin's been working from home. I've been working from home and up at church, getting ready for Vacation Bible School. We still need a lot of people to help, and so that's your plug. Also, since you can't go shopping, clean out your closets and save those sheets. We need those too. VBS is on until it's not, and so until we hear what's going to happen over the summer, we're just going to keep putting one foot in front of the other and getting all of that ready, and we'll keep you guys posted on what's going on with that. We love you guys, and we hope to see you soon. Bye.
Hey, Mulberry. We hope everyone's doing good, and we're thinking about y'all, and we're just ready to come back to normalcy like the rest of y'all.
We're praying for y'all and we miss y'all. Bye.
Bye.
Good morning, Mulberry.
Morning, guys.
Coffee bar. I'm doing the coffee bar this morning. It's locked. Oh, man. Still? How many weeks is this? I really miss seeing you guys at the coffee bar, so I guess you're just going to have to make your own coffee this morning.
Hey, everybody. Missing everybody, and can't wait to get back to what I just call a healthy normal, and can't happen soon enough. So just eager to see what's going to be happening here, and I got a feeling it's going to be sooner than later. Ruff, anything?
No.
That's about right.
I had one more thing I wanted to say. Ladies, you know how we do all these Bible studies in the spring and the fall, and sometimes we don't finish them? Well, this is a great opportunity and time for you to get in those books and finish these studies.
Just
I don't
a thought.
know. Maybe you could cut that out.
Good morning, Mulberry. I hope everybody is doing well. If you're like me, you're getting a little stir crazy and ready to be back together in our services, and hopefully this won't go on too much longer. I do have some words of encouragement that maybe it won't be quite as long as we had first expected, but we'll see. But even so, we're excited that we can meet together, even if it's online, and we've got a great service today. So let me open this with a word of prayer. Father, we are grateful for being able to get together and to worship together, even though it's together online. And we're just grateful for the opportunity that we have to look at your word today and to see how you have incredibly put the word of God together. And so, Father, I just pray that you would bless this time that we are together online, and that your Spirit would teach us and open up your word that we can understand all that it says. And pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
And I lift my voice to worship you, oh my soul. We joy, that Lord my King, and I lift my voice to worship.
answered me and delivered me from every fear. Those who look on Him are radiant. They'll never be ashamed. They'll never be ashamed. This poor man cried, and the Lord heard me and saved me from my enemies. The Son of God surrounds His saints. He will deliver them. He will deliver them. Magnify the Lord with me. Come exalt His name together. Glorify the Lord with me. Come exalt His name forever. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Oh, blessed is he who hides in Him. Oh, fear the Lord. Oh, all you saints, He'll give you everything. He'll give you everything. Magnify the Lord with me. Come exalt His name together. Glorify the Lord with me. Come exalt His name forever. Let us bless the Lord every day and night. Never-ending praise. May our incense rise. Let us bless the Lord every day and night. Never-ending praise. May our incense rise. Let us bless the Lord every day and night. Never-ending praise. May our incense rise. lost are saved, find their way at the sound of your great name. All condemned, feel no shame at the sound of your great name. Every fear has no place at the sound of your great name. The enemy, he has to leave at the sound of your great name. Jesus, worthy is the Lamb that was slain for us, the Son of God and man. You are high and lifted up, and all the world will praise your great name. All we find their strength at the sound of your great name. Hungry souls receive grace at the sound of your great name. The fatherless, they find their rest at the sound of your great name. The sick are healed and the dead are raised at the sound of your great name. Jesus, worthy is the Lamb that was slain for us, the Son of God and man. You are high and lifted up, and all the world will praise your great name. Your great name. Redeemer, my healer, Lord Almighty, Defender, my Savior, you are my King. Redeemer, my healer, Lord Almighty, Defender, my Savior, you are my King. Jesus, worthy is the Lamb that was slain for us, the Son of God and man. You are high and lifted up, and all the world will praise your precious name. Worthy is the Lamb that was slain for us, the Son of God and man. You are high and lifted up, and all the world will praise your great name. Your great name. Your great name.
When I was a kid, I didn't have the pleasure of attending Sunday school or children's church or VBS for that matter. Didn't go to youth camp or youth retreats. I grew up in a family that went to church every weekend, but the church we belonged to didn't, the religion we belonged to didn't offer those types of things. And so I didn't grow up with the Bible. We didn't read the Bible in my house, even though we attended church every weekend. That wasn't something that our family did. We didn't pray together even. Fast forward into my 20s, during my college years, I started learning things about that religion that didn't sit too well with me, and I started very much disagreeing with that church. And so I stopped going to church for a while. I never stopped believing in God, but I just did not attend church. Not until my girlfriend at the time invited me to church. That girlfriend just so happens to be Melissa, who I married later, right? But when we started seeing each other, it made her kind of nervous, and her parents kind of nervous, that she was seeing someone who didn't go to church. So she invited me to the church she was attending at the time in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. And so I went gladly. I didn't mind going to church. But I walked into this church into a situation that I've never seen before. I had never seen up until that time, where people were genuinely happy to be there and showing joy on their faces, smiling and laughing and enjoying each other's company. We walked in, we were immediately greeted by people who were very happy to see us. And people were shaking my hand, people were hugging Melissa and me, just out of pure joy of us being there. And I wasn't used to that. And then the music started, and it was incredible. Me being a musician, I'm gonna definitely notice the music, and it was just awesome to see such great musicians, wonderful singers, playing just such joyous songs. That it really touched my heart. And then the pastor spoke a message. He preached like I had never seen anybody preach before. And it was just an incredible message of hope and how God loves you and He fights for you, and it wasn't, I didn't get saved that day. It was a few months later that I gave my life to Christ. But that was the start, that time in church when Melissa invited me to church, that started me on the road to salvation. And I've never looked back. And now I'm a pastor. So.
Mine are days that God has numbered. I was made to walk with Him. Yet I look for worldly treasure and forsake the King of Kings. But mine is hope in my Redeemer. Though I fall, His love is sure. For Christ has paid for every failing. I am His forevermore. Mine are tears in times of sorrow, darkness not yet understood. Through the valley I must travel, where I see no earthly good. But mine is peace that flows from heaven, and the strength in times of need. I know my pain will not be wasted. Christ completes His work in me. days here as a stranger, pilgrim on a narrow way. One with Christ I will encounter harm and hatred for his name. But mine is armor for this battle, strong enough to last the war. And he has said he will deliver safely to the golden shore. And mine are keys to Zion city, where beside the King I walk. For there my heart has found its treasure. Christ is mine forevermore. Come rejoice now, O my soul, for his love is my reward. Fear is gone and hope is sure. Christ is mine forevermore. Come rejoice now, O my soul, for his love is my reward. Fear is gone and hope is sure. Christ is mine forevermore. And my keys to Zion city, where beside the King I walk. For there my heart has found its treasure. Christ is mine forevermore. Christ is mine forevermore. Christ is mine forevermore.
I hope you enjoyed the worship portion of the service as I did. And as we transition into the message, I wanted to point out that if the children would like to go to mulberrychurch.org on maybe a laptop, tablet, or phone, there is a children's church sermon or message specifically designed for them. You will find a button that looks just like this one. Just click on that and they can watch that while the adults are watching the message. Good morning. I hope you are doing well today. We're going to be in part 2 of Shadows Point to Realities. And this is an incredible study, as I said last week when we began it, that this is the kind of study where you begin to see that only God could have put this Bible together. Only God could have put all these authors over the centuries, given them the things to say in the right order that would be talking about events that would take place some 1,500 years in the future. It's one of those series or studies that maybe you're a teen and you're not quite sure if you believe this, or maybe you're in college and you grew up in church, but you're not really quite sure if what mom and dad and your pastor said is really quite right, or if it's actually accurate. Your professor may differ with what you're saying and your friends there, or maybe you're an adult and you've hit some hard times in life. Maybe it's some medical stuff, maybe some different kinds of persecution, and you begin to question, well, do I really believe that what this says? And this is the kind of study that helps you to say, yes, I do believe it. There's just no way it could not be true. So that's part of the value in this study, is coming to that realization that only God could have put this together. Only God is behind this Bible. And so therefore, we can trust it, we can believe it, and we can have faith that what it says is actually true. So we're looking at shadows that point to realities, and they're revolving around some of the feasts that God gave the Israelites in the Old Testament. And there were basically 7 of them. There were 3 that took place in the spring, 1 that took place in the summer, and 3 that took place in the winter. And the 3 fall ones basically revolved around the barley harvest. So you have the Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the first fruits, and all those kind of related to the barley harvest. And then Pentecost took place in the summer, and that related to the wheat harvest. And then the 3 that took place more in the fall was the trumpets, Day of Atonement, and Tabernacles, and those kind of revolved around the wheat and grape harvest. So we're going to take a look at those and see what God says about that. Now, one of the things that we saw last week, just to recap a little bit, is that God told the Israelites, I want you to do it exactly like I say. You're not to deviate from it. You're not to do it in a different way. I want you to do it exactly in the way that I said, on the exact month, day, in the exact order, exact hour, everything. So we saw that in Numbers 9, starting with verse 1, where it says, the Lord said to Moses, this is God telling Moses, and he said, have the Israelites celebrate the Passover at the appointed time. Not before it, not after it, at the appointed time. And just to make sure he got that, he said, celebrate it at the appointed time. And then he got a little more specific. He said, at twilight, on the 14th day of this month, which was Nisan. That's the Jewish calendar. The month of Nisan is basically our month of April, in accordance with all its rules and regulations. So God was being very specific about what they were to do and when. Now, that raised last week, as I said, the question of, well, why? I mean, what does it matter? Why on this month? Why on this day? Why at this time? Why do it in this order? Maybe I'm busy today. Why not tomorrow? And we looked at that and we said the reason for that is because these feasts were signs and signals to the Israelites about future people or events. And so we saw that in Leviticus 23 that says, the Lord said to Moses, speak to the Israelites and say to them, these are my appointed feast, the appointed feast of the Lord. Now, the word here, appointed feast, is really a single Hebrew word, which literally means appointments. It's God's appointments, or his fixed points in time that he has, and translate here as feast, appointed feast. And when they are referring to something in the future, an event that kind of tells about the future, then it can be translated as signs or signals. And we see that same kind of idea here in Colossians, where Paul talks about these same things. Paul's talking about the religious festivals, the new moon celebrations, and the Sabbath, and he says, these things are a shadow of the things that were to come. The reality, however, is found in Christ. So Paul was in agreement. He was saying these things that are taking place, and we're looking at festivals, these things are shadows. They are pointing forward to something that's going to take place in the future, something that's going to happen. Now, last week we looked at the first three shadows. We looked at, let me do one thing here, say one thing. In Luke 24, I can only imagine that Jesus did not refer to this. When Jesus rose from the dead, he began to appear to some of his disciples. And two of them were walking along the road, and Jesus kind of came up to them. They weren't quite sure who it was because he didn't reveal himself quite yet. And he began to speak to them about the Old Testament, about Moses and the prophets. And look at what it says. It says, and beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he, Jesus, explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. And after Jesus, he talked to them a little bit more and then disappeared, and they were kind of talking to themselves a little bit. And they asked each other, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? Now, I can only imagine if Jesus was explaining things like we're looking at today, along with a whole slew of other stuff, that they were just like, wow. Wow, I had no idea. And their hearts were burning, their minds were burning. They were just flabbergasted about what he was saying. Just like I get sometimes when I'm reading this kind of stuff or studying this kind of stuff, I just am like overwhelmed at the way the Bible was put together. So they had that same kind of experience. Now, a couple of things we looked at last week. We looked at three shadows. The first one we looked at was the afikomen, and that was something that was broken, wrapped, hidden, and reappears in the Seder meal. We all did the Seder meal a little while ago. And if you remember, we had that plate with the 3 pieces of matzah on the plate. They were each separated by a cloth. And what the Jews would do, and they still do today all around the world, they've been doing it for centuries, is they would look at those 3 pieces, and they do this little ceremony that I'll share in just a second. But they weren't really quite sure why they did it. They weren't quite sure, what this exactly represents. So, they would say, well, some people think that the 3 pieces of matzah there represent the unity of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And others would say, no, I think it really represents the unity of worship. You have the priests, the Levites, and the Israelites. And so what they would do is they would take that middle piece of matzah and they would break it, they would wrap it in a cloth, they would hide it, and then at the end of the dinner they would bring it back out, unwrap it, and then they would have that as dessert. Now, the question is, could that be a shadow? Is that something that possibly God has put into the Seder meal that Jews do all around the world today, and it's pointing to something else? And of course, I think, the answer is yes, absolutely. It actually points to Jesus' death, that he was wrapped in linen when he died, then he was buried, and he was risen from the dead. We see all that. It's easily seen from that little exercise that they do in the Seder. So we looked at that. Then also we looked at the second shadow, which was that the Israelites were saved by faith in the blood of the Passover lamb. Remember that they were in Egypt, and God was going to bring them out, and to convince the Pharaoh to do that, he sent a series of plagues, and the Pharaoh would not release them. And so the 10th plague was going to be the death of the firstborn of every single family in Egypt, except those who got a lamb, sacrificed a lamb, caught its blood, and painted the blood around the door. And for the people that did that, the angel of death, when he came through Egypt, he would pass over their homes. And so God very specifically told them that they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides of and the tops of the door frames of the houses where they were to eat. And then they would be delivered or saved from death that day. And so we see that. And so the question is, does that point to something? Is that a shadow of some future reality? And I believe the answer is yes. It seems to point to, as they had faith in the Passover lamb's blood to save them, that faith in Jesus' blood as the final Passover lamb saves us. We see that direct correlation between the two. And so we see that. And then the last thing we looked at last week was the third shadow, is that animals were examined for defects. Remember in Exodus 12:5, we saw that God said the animals that you choose must be a year-old males without defect. And the priest would examine them to make sure that they were without defect. And the question is, does that point to something? Does the very fact that the lamb, the Passover lamb, had to be a lamb without defect, does that point to something? Does that help us see who the future Messiah might possibly be? And the answer, I think, is yes, it does, because Jesus was examined and found to be without defect. We looked at last week how the Pharisees and the Herodians inspected Jesus, the chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin, and even Herod and Pilate examined them. They even brought in false witnesses, and they still couldn't find a single thing against Jesus. They couldn't figure out anything to fault him on. Now, if you take any person today, any regular person, you could find thousands and thousands of issues and problems. I mean, I can't even count how many mistakes I've made, how many things I've done wrong. You look at anybody and you can find issues and problems with them. But only Jesus, only God coming in the flesh could be the type of person that would be without defect. And so, yeah, it points to that very fact that the Messiah had to be without defect, and Jesus fits that. Now, the next thing we're going to look at today, we're going to look at three more today. And the fourth shadow I want to look at today is that the Passover lambs entered Jerusalem on Nisan 9th and 10th, okay? So one of the things we know from Josephus was a historian who was writing about the time that Jesus was around. He was writing in the first century, telling us about what the Jews did. He wrote kind of a history on the Jewish people. And one of the things that he said was this. He said, in referring to the Passover and talking a little bit about that, he said, accordingly, on the occasion of the feast called Passover, so he's referring to the Passover, he said, at which they sacrificed from the 9th to the 11th hours, which is 3 to 5, they were sacrificing the Passover lambs. The victims, the Passover lambs, were counted and amounted to, listen to this, 255,600 lambs were sacrificed during the Passover. 250,000 lambs were sacrificed on the Passover. That's a lot of lambs. So when you go back to our calendar here, you see that the people were to choose a lamb on the 10th. And the Jews had grown and multiplied to the point where they needed 250,000 lambs to be sacrificed. So that tells me one thing. That tells me that you can't bring in 250,000 lambs, all on the same day and get them all to the people. No, those lambs were coming in at least the day before, putting them in cages, getting them sorted up, and as these that were brought in that day were sold to people, they were bringing in more. So the lambs were coming in full force, certainly these 2 days. So the question is that somehow a shadow of what's going to be taking place in the end? Do we see that? Do we see that is somehow a shadow? And I believe the answer is yes, absolutely. It seems to point to the fact that Jesus entered Jerusalem the very moment the other Passover lambs were entering into Jerusalem. Jesus came in as God's final Passover lamb at the same time that all the other Passover lambs were coming in. And the Passover is one of those feasts that was to be done inside of Jerusalem. There was 3 of the feasts that people had to actually travel to Jerusalem. It couldn't be done anywhere else. They had to be traveled to Jerusalem and do it right there in the city itself. And so Jesus came in to the city, as God's Passover lamb. That's where he had to do it. And he came in with all the other Passover lambs. So we see this from a place from John 12, 2 places in John 12. Starting in verse 1, it says this: 6 days before the Passover, which if the Passover is on the 14th, minus 6, brings us to Nisan 8th. So 6 days before the Passover on Nisan 8, Jesus arrived in Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Then it goes on to say, on the next day on Nisan 9th, the great crowd that had come from the feast heard that Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem. This is his triumphal entry. They took palm branches and went out to meet him, shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the King of Israel." And so what we see there is that as Jesus is entering into the Jerusalem, it is on Nisan 9th. And what we find is that Jesus is again arriving at the same time as all the Passover lambs. So I'd like you to pause the video and answer this question. Is that a shadow? We're finding that Jesus is lining up with all the requirements that are needed for the Passover, and he's lining up with all the requirements for the Passover lambs. And the very fact that he comes into Jerusalem at the exact same time as all the other Passovers, is that pointing to Christ somehow? Does he coincidentally enter Jerusalem with all the other Passover lambs, or is he coming in as God's Passover lamb? So take a minute or two or three or four to talk about that, to answer that question, and then after you discuss that, hit play, and then come back and we'll keep going. Okay, I hope you guys had a good discussion, good conversation about that. The fifth shadow is kind of a short one, so I'll combine that with the sixth one, and you can discuss at the end of the sixth one. But the fifth one is this, is that animals were chosen by the Jews on Nisan 10th. And we saw that before. We looked at this before in Exodus 12:3, that it says the whole community of Israel on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family. So we saw that, and we kind of charted that on the calendar for Nisan, that on the 10th, the lambs were to be chosen right there on the 10th. Okay? Now, the question is that a shadow? Could choosing lambs on the 10th point to a future event or person? Would choosing the lamb on the 10th, if we believe that Jesus is the Messiah, that he's God's Passover lamb, does that correlate with Jesus? Does that correlate with what took place in his life? And I believe it does. I believe that what we see is on Nisan 10th, that Jesus was clearly identified by chief priests and teachers as the one who must die. We saw this we see this in Mark 11. So Jesus had just finished cleansing the temple, throwing out all the money changers and those buying and selling, and he cleaned everything out. And this is a couple days before the Passover and before his crucifixions that same week. He did that, and then the chief priest and the teachers of the law heard this and began looking for a way to kill him. They had targeted Jesus as the one that they need to kill. So we see that on that day, Jesus is identified as the one who they are going after, which in maybe a roundabout way of seeing it, maybe not perfect, but he's identified as God's Passover lamb, the one that is going to be sacrificed on behalf of or by the chief priests and the teachers. So the sixth shadow, let's just move on to that one, because I think this is also a very significant one. But the sixth one is this: Passover lambs were slaughtered on Nisan 14th at 3 p.m. That is when they were killed. We see this in a couple places, but before we do it, let me point out about the daily sacrifices. So the Jews would also have sacrifices every day, just all the time, just regular sacrifices, and they would take place at 9 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon. And we see the command to do this here in Exodus 29:38. It says this: "This is what you are to offer on the altar regularly each day: 2 lambs, a year old, offer one in the morning, and we know from Josephus and other historians that that was done at 9 in the morning, one in the morning, and the other at twilight. Now, this word here is actually kind of an interesting word. It's literally between the evenings. It doesn't really give a time. It just says between the evenings. So you have to kind of understand what's being said there. So you would think, okay, so the Jewish day started at 6 in the morning, okay? So 6 a.m. is when their day started. So halfway through the day, the mark between the day and night would be 6 p.m., all right? So you might think, okay, so between the evenings that would be from 6 p.m. to maybe the next 6 p.m., but that between those two, 6 p.m. the night of one day and 6 p.m. at the night of the next day, well, that'd be 6 in the morning. So that can't be right. So what's being said here? So between the evenings, the first evening would be 6 p.m. That's clearly one. That's halfway through the 24-hour period. The second evening, though, would be 12 noon. So what would happen is they would have the sun would come up, and right at 12 noon, right as it began to go right past the straight up mark, that would be considered evening. It's headed toward evening. So between the evenings would be between 12 noon and 6 p.m., so that would put us at 3 p.m. So that is what is meant by this. So they would have a regular offering at 9 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon. And so we have Josephus again was agreeing with this. We read this passage before, but he was also saying this. He said, accordingly, on the occasion of the feast called Passover, so he's talking about Passover, at which they sacrifice from the 9th to the 11th hour. Again, so if 6 is the beginning of the day, the 9th hour is going to be your 3 p.m. to the 11th hour. It's going to be 5 p.m. So they began their sacrifices at 3, but because they had 250,000 lambs to sacrifice, it took a while. So they would sacrifice between 3 and 5. So we see that coming from Josephus as well. So the question I'm going to ask is, are these specific times down to the hour shadows pointing to a future event or person? I mean, you think about it. God said, I want you to sacrifice the Passover lamb between the evenings, which is at 3 p.m. We're down to the hour. So the question is that pointing to something? Is that telling us who the Messiah is going to be? Is that helping us to say, yes, Jesus is the Messiah? And what we find is that, yes, it seems to point to Jesus' crucifixion. If we look at this, what we see here is that a couple things to kind of unfold this. The first thing is that Jesus was very well aware of his coming to the end of his life. He knew that his appointed time, his time to be crucified, was right at hand. We see this in Matthew 26. It says the disciples came to Jesus and asked. Now this is the final week of Jesus' life, right before that last Passover and right before he was crucified. They come to him and ask, where do you want us to make preparations for you to eat the Passover? Where are we going to do this? Whose house? Where do you want us to go and get everything ready and set up for that? And Jesus replied, go into the city to a certain man, which is a very vague Greek word, just a guy. So he's like, just go to a guy and tell him the teacher says, my appointed time is near. See, Jesus knew that his time has come and that his appointed time, and we know a little bit later that to be crucified is at hand. And he says, but I'm going to celebrate the Passover with my disciples at your house. So the first thing that we see here is that Jesus knew when his appointed time was and that it was right around the corner. But the question is, why is he being so vague? I mean, why does he say, go to a certain man? I mean, the disciples are like, how am I going to do that? What do you mean? There's like 2.5 million people in Jerusalem. We're all here celebrating the Passover. What do you mean, go find a certain guy? So Mark tells us a little bit about the same conversation. We find this in Mark 14. He's referring to the same conversation, and he tells us one extra little piece of information that Jesus told the disciples. It says that Jesus' disciples asked him again, where do you want us to go and make preparations for you to eat the Passover? And so it says, so he sent two of his disciples telling them, go into the city and a certain man, a man carrying a jar of water. Like that's helpful, you know. Okay, so we're going to go find some guy carrying a jar of water. But they had been with Jesus long enough that they knew that if that's what he's telling us to do, then we'll go do it. We'll find some guy, you know, carrying a jar of water, and we'll follow him to his house, and that's where we're to be. So they did. But the question is why is he being so vague? What's going on here? And to understand why Jesus is being so vague, we have to go to the verse just before this one. And so in Mark 14:10 and 11, it says this. What happened just before that, moments before that, it says, then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray Jesus to them. They were delighted to hear this and promised to give him money. So he watched for an opportunity to hand him over. All right? So Judas had already done this, and he was looking for an opportunity. He was looking for a time where when he knew where Jesus would be, he could go tell the chief priest, hey, he's going to be right here at this point in time, so come and get him. So he was waiting for that. Now, the question is, did Jesus know this? Was Jesus aware of this? And the answer is yes. Jesus was very aware of this. We see in John 13, during the Passover meal, it says that Jesus was troubled in his spirit and testified, I tell you the truth, one of you is going to betray me. See, Jesus knew. He knew that Judas was getting ready to betray him. And he goes on, and in fact it says that it is the one to whom I will give this piece of bread when I have dipped it into the dish, possibly into the dish of bitter herbs. Then dipping the piece of bread, he gave it to guess who? Judas Iscariot. He knew that he was going to betray him. So that begins to answer the question. Jesus was being vague about where to have the Passover meal, because if he said, okay, go down to 7th Street and go to, Herbert's house and tell him we're going to do it. Well, Judas would go and tell the chief priest where it was going to be. So Jesus didn't do that. He kept it vague. It was a miracle how God allowed this to unfold. And Judas was left in the dark at that point and had no idea where he was going to do this. And then look at what it says. It says, as soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered into him. And then Jesus said to him, what you are about to do, do quickly. As soon as Judas had taken the bread, he went out. So what is Jesus doing? He gives him the bread. Satan fills Judas at that point, and Jesus says, leave. You know, what you're going to do, go do quickly. You need to move on. You need to get out of here. And what took place after that is it took place after the meal, and that's where Jesus revealed to his disciples that he was God's final Passover lamb. That's where communion takes place. That's where he took the bread and said, this is now my body. He took the cup. This is now my blood. And he told them and explained to them that he was going to be the final Passover lamb. But he knew all along that Judas was trying to look for an opportunity to betray him. And so he did not allow that to happen, because he wanted the order to be Passover and then crucifixion. Now, a whole series of events took place after the Seder. They went to Gethsemane, and Jesus began to pray. As you remember that scripture, he was praying with drops of blood and so forth. And they get him, and they began the trials that night. And a whole series of events take place all throughout the night. And they find, finally, at 9 in the morning, this takes place. Jesus is finally put on a cross at 9 in the morning. Mark tells us this in Mark 15:24. He says, and they crucified him, dividing up his clothes, the soldiers down below as he was being crucified. They cast lots to see what each would get. It was the 3rd hour when they crucified him. The 3rd hour. If the day starts at 6, the 3rd hour is 9. 9 a.m. in the morning is when Jesus was put on the cross. Now, he was put on the cross at 9, but it says that he died at 3. Look at Mark goes on to say, and at the 9th hour, so the day starts at 6, the 9th hour is all the way around to 3 p.m. So at 3 p.m., Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? And with a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. He died. Jesus died at 3 p.m. at the 9th hour. He died. Now that to me is amazing. He died. Why did he die? Because Exodus 12:6 says, take care of them, the Passover lambs. You get them on the 10th, you take care of them till the 14th, until the 14th day of the month, when all the people of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight, between the evenings, between 12 noon and 6 in the evening, which is 3 p.m. That's amazing to me that 1,500 years before Jesus even stepped onto the pages of history, they were told very specifically not to deviate from this, that at 3 p.m. they were to slaughter the Passover lambs. The blood of the Passover lamb would save them, and by faith in that blood, they would be saved from the angel of death. So the question here that I want you to end with, I want you to pause the video and answer this question. Actually, I'm going to pray, and then you can answer this question and we'll be done. But the question is this: is this why God specifically told the Israelites when and how to celebrate this festival? In the month of Nisan, on the 14th day, and between the evenings. How could the exact hour the Messiah would die have been prophesied 1,500 years prior? How's that possible? Let's pray. Father, I just thank you for your word that is full of miraculous things that only you could have written being behind these different authors over a span of centuries. You were crafting this, and you were inspiring them to write certain things, so that through some of these different festivals that we can see that they were pointing to the coming Messiah, and that coming Messiah could be no other than Jesus himself. And so, Father, I pray that as everyone discusses this final, or this next shadow, the sixth shadow, Father, I pray that you would give them insight into the things that you've done over the centuries, and that this would be a very fruitful time. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. You can take a minute to talk about that, and then we'll be done.